You made a point earlier. I was wanting to challenge that. Like you said, cognition is you can't really grow cognition, and I'm thinking from my personal experience has been that there has been this kind of black and white moments for me where my cognition was kind of really poor and pathetic for a long time because of the belief systems that I had about myself. And then something happened, and then I got exposed to this plethora of cognitive skills that I actually had, and it was more psychological in that sense, but I would be called dumb. If my parents are watching this, they would call me an idiot, a dull boy. In India they call you dull, right? Like that was purely like kind of like this brainwashing, so to speak, because you were put down so often. In school I was just an awkward kid. I ate meat in primary school, so I was always sat away from the kids who didn't eat meat. So all of these things sort of happened developmentally. I didn't kind of have the full experience, and I was a year ahead in my class. I was supposed to be a year after, so I was not even cognitively developed. So I had even more of the inhibitions I had because I was just not up to snuff. Especially when you're a kid, the cognitive differences are on a logarithmic scale, right? Almost yes. 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And so because of that, I grew up with this sort of extreme sense of like different version of my cognition, I always thought of myself as this kind of stupid kid. And then you realize later on in life, like I said, something happened, some black and white incident happened, and I was like, holy shit, I can think through this. I'm okay.
It would take a lot of time. I mean, one can do that, but does that make you a better programmer? In some ways it does, because you learn how to solve problems. But once somebody has the mental structures to solve those problems, after that, repeating that process is not really that useful. And so one should use a calculator at some point of time if it is freeing up your computational resources in your head. But one should know how to add quickly on the fly as well.
I think my quality of life would have been very different. I know I'm speaking about a counterfactual here, but like that thing, like playing basketball, doing art, and these were things that I like to do. Like we would be living in much more kind of a fully actualized society where people are actually doing the thing that brings them the infinite amount of joy, not being a bot in an office stuck behind, 9 to 5 kind of thing. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But there are a lot of people for whom which that is not the thing, and they're sort of like living the other life.
I think, what are the steps involved to do this? How do you know that's the right list? Why is it 11 steps? Why not 9? Why not 7? And which step is more important? Now, you're going to prompt that to ChatGPT, and it's going to reply. And yes, it can reflect, but that's just the associated knowledge of the internet. So this is where your own subjective judgment comes in handy. Mm-hmm. Do we know more than the internet, or does the internet know more than us? Most people would say the internet knows more than us. I would actually disagree, because the internet knows everything, but how do you know you're going to the right part of the internet? To the right person who knows.
But you could make that argument even to a library, right? Like you could, you've got millions of books, let's say, in a library. All this information is out there, and how do you know which book you're going to pick up that's going to give you that fundamental base knowledge? You might be skipping a few steps and get something that's not relevant to what you want to try and learn. You still have to use your intellect to kind of, separate the wheat from the chaff and separate and have the sort of the acumen to understand what you're going to consume, internet or the library, and then sort of use that. So you still need that ability to discern, right?
Correct. Autistic children don't really get it that way. For an autistic child, that understanding is not intuitive. And so it has to be made understood to that child that this is how other human beings perceive your communication, which is intuitive to others, and which is the unfortunate hand that autistic children have been dealt with. Mm-hmm. So LLMs, which are by definition large language models, they're mostly dealing with text at this stage. Of course, they're also processing images. Going to the text part is also part of the journey. What I found doing this research is there are children who are non-verbal children who don't even vocalize. How are you going to use a large language model for a child who doesn't even talk? They seem to address that point, but it's not really individualized because there is a specific format with the teacher has to fill out to basically judge the child's capabilities. But that format is highly standardized. They have to follow certain protocols. They can only say certain things. There's a very low level of subjectivity in the entire system. Because when you standardize, McDonald's has to make its burgers as similar in every establishment. That what is the end result? McDonald's has to use a lot of processed food. It cannot use food which
local
is fresh,
ingredients. Yeah.
local ingredients, because
Right.
they have to standardize it. And
Yeah.
so when a huge bureaucratic edifice is created, that bureaucracy is really tying us down, in the sense that the individual teacher has very little capability to influence outcomes, because
Totally.
they
Yeah.
have to fill this out. They have to take 10 exams and not 2 exams. They cannot take that decision to modify the curriculum, for example.
Yeah.
Hi, and welcome to the Idea Sandbox podcast. I'm your host, Rajiv. Today, I have the absolute pleasure and privilege of hosting Abhinav Choudhry, a PhD student at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, focused on human-computer interactions, more specifically talking about how AI could be applied in a variety of settings, including working with kids that are speech-language impaired, using AI systems that could actually help in these areas. Abhinav is a polymath. He has a bachelor's degree in computer science. He has a finance degree from Delhi University. He has an environmental science and policy degree from Cornell. And now he's pursuing his PhD at the U of I. And it was a huge privilege for me to actually chat with him. I use AI in a variety of different settings in the kind of work I do, be it podcasting, be it editing, be it blogging, be it artwork. And I use it to basically augment the kind of work that I do. And I'm very, very bullish about the whole project of AI and how it can actually help humanity. So I wanted to pick Abhinav's brain and see how we could use AI in solving specific problems, specifically talking about problems that have plagued humanity, I should say India, corruption in bureaucracies and things like that. It's like hard problems. And I see there are direct applications of AI that could actually solve these problems to a large degree. And I wanted to pick Abhinav's brain and see what he thought about it. We kind of had a back and forth, a spirited conversation, a spirited debate about these things. Hopefully we'll pick up from our conversation these kind of spirited conversations, spirited debate that we had. And also I wanted to understand how Abhinav's kind of diverse background, educational background that he has, how he plans to sort of apply that and how it's affected the way he thinks about these things. We got into that as well. We got into a wide range of things. This is a long conversation. This is 3.5 hours, so buckle up, I guess. This was very interesting to me. The fact that we went on for that long of a time is testament to the fact that we both were interested. We both wanted to kind of get into conversation. I tried my best to also splice in specific data and videos and whatnot to support certain claims that we both were talking about, just so that I'm transparent about what I'm talking about, and it is transparent to you as well. Well, we talked about a wide range of things. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Please give me feedback. I want to know where my blind spots are, like I said, and what direction could I take? What specific topics could I talk about in the future? And I'm actually hosting another AI researcher from the U of I soon here, and anyway, hold on for that. And I bring you Abhinav Choudhry. Love and peace. The Idea Sandbox. Thank you.
Hey, Abhin, how are you?
Doing this work in information sciences,
Okay.
and using, I'm exploring what generative AI can do. But I personally am very non-tool dependent.
Okay.
I just use a pen and memory, and pretty much I'm like, have you watched Sherlock? Not watched. Did you read Sherlock Holmes?
No, I haven't. I've watched movies and things like that.
Did you watch the series, the British series of Sherlock Holmes?
No. I think I've watched only the old movies, the black and whites, and then I watched the newer ones. I forgot who the actor is, but anyway, I no, not the British TV series.
Right. Okay. So there is this character in that, and that's also in the original book. who uses something called a mind palace.
Okay.
And so you store memory by keeping it in various parts of the mind. Now, I don't actually use the mind palace, although I wish I guess I could. It's just requires an extra bit of work. But essentially, you can store certain parts of your life in your memory and you can index it. And you can think of it like retrieving stuff from a bookcase. So there's this book, it has this memory. Basically, one can remember an awful lot more than we actually do remember. Now, that comes naturally to some people, it comes less naturally to others. But I would say this is one of the things I've found. The more and we can go over it in the actual thing, in the actual
Yeah, yeah.
recording.
Yeah.
But it's that when you jot down something, you actually then reduce the tendency to retain that in memory. In fact, reduce is not the correct word. You almost eliminate it. Once you've written down, even by pen, the memory believes the brain is efficient. The brain no longer wants to store it because it doesn't want to keep much in its RAM. So
Right.
it has to get rid of stuff. But till you don't note it down, it's still going to stay. That's why if you have something pending, it's going to nag at your head. I have to do this, I have to do this. But if you write a to-do list, remarkably, it actually reduces the nagging, which is why people do it. But people do not actually finish the to-do list. So I use the memory a lot more than the average person does.
Okay.
And so if I use AI tools too much, then the thing is, it rarely actually gives me something which is at really the level of the prefrontal cortex. I mean, it's not very cerebral in terms of what it can do for you. It is more of a taskmaster. That's how an intelligent assistant. So you have to, I use it a lot more sparingly, but I do use it fair amount because I do need it for my research. But
Right.
I would say what happens with ChatGPT is that people rely on it to just produce a list, and I think to myself, wait, this kind of list is exactly what you're supposed to produce from your head, because that is the human level thinking. If it's producing that for you, like, what are the steps involved to do this? How do you know that's the right list? Why is it 11 steps? Why not 9? Why not 7? That is, and which step is more important? Now, you're going to prompt that to ChatGPT and it's going to reply. And yes, it can reflect, but that's just the associated knowledge of the internet. So this is where your own subjective judgment comes in handy. Do we know more than the internet, or does the internet know more than us? Most people would say the internet knows more than us. I would actually disagree, because the
Really?
internet knows everything, but how do you know you're going to the right part of the internet, to the right person who knows?
But you could make that argument even to a library, right? Like you could, you've got millions of books, let's say, in a library. All this information is out there, and how do you know which book you're going to pick up that's going to give you that fundamental base knowledge? You might be skipping a few steps and get something that's not relevant to what you want to try and learn. You still have to use your intellect to kind of, separate the wheat from the chaff, and separate and have the sort of the acumen to understand what you're going to consume, internet or the library, and then sort of use that. So you still need that ability to discern, right?
Correct. Exactly. That's a good example. So with ChatGPT, you would be doing that by writing the right prompts that give you the library, the right book. So what search parameters are you using to find the right book for you? And of course, your own understanding decides how well you can understand the book. See, if I read The Art of War and someone's written, I mean, you've heard of that book.
Yes.
You know that they're just single lines. But in battle, a commander has to understand, has to really interpret what that particular line means in the current context, which is completely different from when it was written. So it's that interpretation. So yes, ChatGPT can give you that interpretation, but at some level, if you're expert enough, you know it intuitively. And so I believe it depends a lot on what you're automating out of the process. What is more difficult for you,
Yeah.
or what is more time consuming for you. So I totally believe in automating simple coding tasks and also simple lists, which I know I can do, but it's just too time consuming. But
Right.
anything with a higher cognitive requirement, I won't use ChatGPT for, not just yet, not till we have AGI,
Yeah.
which is a different beast.
Yeah, I think my opinion is that, I mean, we're talking about, if we talk about AI in general, right? So there's different flavors of it. So for example, and so ChatGPT is one flavor of it, but I guess I have this app I've signed up for called Soundtrap. It's online music, creation and all of that stuff. It's got some AI built into it, and I am absolutely very, very far away from music. And man, I've had so much fun playing with it, because it comes up with these AI kind of mixes in the middle. So you pull in some beats and some bass and some things like that, whatever tracks you want to pull in, and you can say, AI kind of enhance this, and it enhances it. And I'm like, okay, I can build on that now. So it's kind of like an additive process. So I'm like super thrilled about it, because it actually knows how to properly kind of place the little sound that I wanted to place. So for like an amateur learner like me, it's a great. I would have to have an expert sitting next to me. I would have to hire somebody or go watch a video or something like that to do that. Now it's like right there. But I take your point though. You still, if somebody's asking ChatGPT for specific like advice, taking it whole hog, you're kind of missing the point. This is an augmentation tool,
Nice.
more than anything else.
Exactly. I agree with you. And I like the example you provided. If you're talking about music, if you are not an expert, then it can provide you a lot more information and almost for free. I mean, $20 a month.
Right,
Maybe.
right, right. It is almost free.
Right?
I was
It is
I was making an argument. By the way, sorry to interrupt you. I was making this argument. Somebody that read it today. It's like, humanity is always dealt with. I shouldn't maybe say this, but this is the chimera of the perpetual machine at our doorstep. You're getting something for free in some sense. Of course, you've spent some money. Some, $20 is one thing, but as humanity, we put power and chips and data centers and neural network, all this data that we sucked in and put it into this. That's the work that somebody else did. But $20 for the kind of value you're getting is kind of like this chimera of the perpetual machine that's come at our doorstep, in a sense.
right, right. It's just like the internet. I mean, in the 90s, the internet was such a revolution,
Right.
and it still is.
It
And
is.
that is also part of that machine. I mean, everyone takes it for granted, but trust me, that you can't take it for granted in every part of the globe.
I
it's
know.
still
Yeah.
it's still magical in the sense of
Right.
what it can do for you. And I think what happens with AI is it has to augment you. So if I am learning music and I'm trying to develop something, then it helps me learn it much faster. But
Mhm.
if I am just assuming that AI will do it for me, then there's a problem, because then one is not really learning anything new in the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ultimately, the aim is to at least be close to the expert if one is spending enough time on it. Or if one is casual, then be able to accomplish expert level stuff, but with limited help, limited expert help. So the AI provides a lot of help to us uh, at almost no cost.
Right.
But that help, and that's one of the critical points, you cannot trust that help at all points of time. Just like we can't trust every expert to be right all the time. But in the
Right.
case of the expert versus AI, there are subtle features of human-computer interaction which make things different. Which makes things different in the sense that when a computer tells you the same thing as a human, people treat it differently, and this depends on their previous history of interactions with AI or with computers in general. So some people, for example, would trust a computer far more on certain factors. on certain topics than a human being. And they would not trust a computer at all on something else.
Mhm.
And these are psychological. Ultimately, we are humans and we're using AI. If we were computers using computers, it would be a different thing. But when we are humans, we have to understand how it works with our psychology. What I'm very interested in exploring, and what I think we have to spend a lot of time exploring in the future, is being able to understand how does using these augmented tools change our thinking within our head, our use of memory, our use of creative thinking. How much of it is augmentation, and how much of it is replacement, which would be much more dangerous, because in case the AI tool is removed, can I actually go through that process as I did? That's what we should avoid losing out. For example, if I'm using like when somebody practices cricket and one is using a ball machine, that's an augmentation. And there's a real life baller. Now the ball machine has its, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
The ball machine has its advantages. But what happens is, in case the ball machine is missing, can I then not play? That should not be the level. If somebody's grown up that only the ball machine throws balls at me, and it's like typical, and then an actual human being comes and starts playing with you, that person is going to feel lost because, wait, this is not predictable. This is very different. I don't know
Yeah.
why this is happening. I think that because we have grown up with very 80s, 90s tools, we've already built the structure. So we can operate without a lot of AI tools because there were no AI tools. But in the future, as people rely more on it, what's going to happen is we would have people lose this capability to be able to accomplish things on their own, like calculators, for instance. I think I hardly see anyone even like if you have to add 792 and 22, people would bring out a calculator and try it. They're not going to. I'm not saying it's a great skill to have, by the way, but it's just that that part of our brain is no longer functioning. Now, this is a neurological, this is a neuroscience problem. Is that part of the brain which is being freed from doing this calculation, is that helping us in some other way by saving our cognitive processes, or are we actually losing a part of our brain or our capability? And that's the thing I'm worried about, or are not worried about, I would say. That's the thing I would like to explore.
Okay.
We should not become dumber because we're using smart tools. You're flirting with AGI. It's supposed to be smart,
Yeah.
and we become dumb. No, man.
So that's a human sciences or social sciences problem, right? Because it's like how do we design our society such that the incentives are lined up in a way where we just don't become like that Wall-E character. You remember that movie Wall-E, where these roly-poly people, they kind of roll around in this spaceship. There's this dystopian future. Yeah. Anyway, so the point, one of the key aspects of that movie. Okay, it's this dystopian robot dominated future, and it's a fantastic movie. I'd highly recommend it. And one of the kind of the satire they make about the way we're approaching technology is that we become these kind of like almost look like seals on a bed sipping on like Coke and watching just this kind of Instagram sort of reel going back and forth. Like they're just we're literally, and the robots are doing everything for us, everything from serving us to cleaning us up to, and Earth has become this wasteland. And so that is the dystopian future. If we say, all right, just take up everything and we'll just. So I think it's really a matter of like a social sciences design problem where you say, all right, from my perspective, when I look at AI, I'm like, I'm an 80s kid. I was born in 79. So, I was used to doing everything manually. Like even my engineering drawing class was, draw it with your hand and set square and this and that, right? Yeah. Okay.
Drafter.
Great. Okay. Great.
I've
Drafter.
used the
Sorry. Yeah.
original, yeah, the
Yeah.
old drafter.
The big 2D thing that moves around on your board and all that. Yeah. So so yeah, you know, for me, when I look at it, my perspective, it's like, oh my God, all of these things are fantastic. They're just absolutely enhancing my craft. They're freeing up my time. I'm able to use it in 10 different areas, literally in 10 different areas, in whatever I'm creating. And it's great. But then, and so I guess my point is that it's freed up my time so I could do the creative thing that I want to do, um,
Yes.
and explore all these areas that I could never explore. So I think this is a good sweet spot. The only limiting factor for me is like I have to learn how to monetize it. That's the only thing. I'll figure it out. But the point is that I'm enjoying. I mean, getting in the flow state on a daily basis, and it's like, how do we get humanity into flow states on a regular basis, right? Because that's great. That's great. Then we'll all be producing the best thing that we could probably produce.
Right. I so agree with that. It's that we have small worker bots or our own minions in a way,
Hmm.
who would be, or Oompa Loompas,
Yeah, yeah.
who are essentially, because that's what these AI tools are. And so if one is able to manipulate the technology the right way, then that's exactly what you achieve, a flow state. But that is after one, so one cannot learn from the Oompa Loompas. I mean, you can, but not too much. You still have to be Willy Wonka and know what chocolate to make.
Hmm.
And I think once one has that capacity, then one is able to use it perfectly. So we should use it after we already have the skills. But once one already has the skills, then that's what you should use, because that's far more efficient. Uh, if I know how to write a Python program, and I don't have to prove to anyone that I can write a program, but if it takes 5 seconds to make that program using ChatGPT with the right prompt, I can make 100 programs a day and I can design a full system. But if I'm coding and typing and then finding out on Stack Overflow, that's going to take a lot of time. I mean, one can do that, but does that make you a better programmer? In some ways, it does, because you learn how to solve problems. But once somebody has the mental structures to solve those problems, after that, repeating that process is not really that useful. And so um, one should use a calculator at some point of time if it is freeing up your computational resources in your head. But one should know how to add quickly on the fly as well. I think retaining that cognitive capacity, being able to write a Python program sometime if you do not have a tool, is important, because I just think that the way the brain works, it's not going to be as effective as it would have been um, if one completely loses the capacity to write a program. The reason I say that is, how would one critically analyze a good program versus a bad program? Because if I do not know that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rely on the AI tool to critique itself. And that can be a recursive loop, and basically become a circle. It could be circular. You may not find, because the AI can only spit out what's already in its system. But then, if not everything is in its system, there cannot be innovation through that circular loop. I mean, well, there's research going on that, but not yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, and we can say, I think you must have watched some other podcasts on this. Lex Friedman does a lot of them. And he talks to these mathematical geniuses who just debate whether it's mathematically possible to have AI really be innovative or come up with its own things. And what is AGI, mathematically speaking? Can it come from just scaling up a model? These are, I actually don't think it can in its current avatar.
Mm.
That would be my personal opinion. I don't think it's AGI in the true sense, although If you change the definition of AGI, and depending on what you, then I think you could just say, yeah, it's close enough. But if it's true intelligence in the sense that it's not based on a program in some sense, then I think we're still a distance away from that. Yeah, I would say that with an AI tool, develop the skill first and then use it, and then beat everyone who's just using it without the AI tool. Because I think we're going to be some years yet from everyone using every AI tool. And so if you learn those tools quickly as you are yourself, I
Yeah.
think you will have competitive edge, certainly. But yeah, you should learn how to monetize it. Even I
Yeah.
don't know how to.
Yeah. I to your earlier point, a point about in human beings getting intellectually atrophied because we stop learning what logic is, what is a loop, what is a if then else, and things like that. I That's a fair point, but I think it remains to be seen. I'm still on the side of the fence where, I think if you have this intelligence system that is so good at executing your commands and it's able to sort of reason within the context of what you're asking, you can offload a lot of those kind of low-level tasks, so to speak, in quotes, off to it, right? And so a programming language becomes sort of a moot point. I was listening to somebody. Um, this is making a tall claim, again, in some AI podcast or whatever. He was saying that eventually, and this is kind of really out there, he's saying eventually the programming paradigm will completely vanish. So you'll have this kind of agent where you talk to the agent, and the agent will put whatever code is necessary. You can never see it, it's a black box, to get the job done. So this whole like paradigm that us humans live in, like, you have version control, you have standards, you have coding practices and things like that. All of that stuff, you can just throw it out the window because it'll just be some black box. It could probably use Python in this part and C++ there, and then some front end there, but it'll get the job done for you, and it'll write test cases for itself, and it'll check itself out and self-correct and all of that stuff. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great. And in another adjacent podcast, Matt Welsh, I don't know if you've heard of this guy. He gave a class at Harvard, CS50 class, So, and he sort of give a talk for an hour, and his claim is that, and I'll probably link it to this. His claim is that programming sucks and human beings are not good at it, and we should all kind of move away from it. I hate doing it, and he's a professor, so he's not some Joe Schmo on the street who thinks programming sucks.
I think I might not have watched the hour-long video, but I definitely have heard of his claim, and I might have actually heard him speak about it. I kind of agree. So this is the thing. Not everyone is a good programmer. In fact,
1 second. Are you still there? Can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Sorry. My noise canceling turned off. Another snafu in the middle of my podcast.
That's okay. It's
Sorry,
okay. I don't
Abhinav.
think we
Keep making
began.
a point. What's that?
I don't think we formally began in a beginning.
Yeah, it's okay. This is a fun chat. So I think this is kind of how I want to approach it anyway. Let's just like slowly tease into it, and your work of field of work and things like that. Let's just kind of slowly get into it eventually as we keep going.
Right. So I think yeah. So you talked about the CS professor. I've seen that argument, and I would say I agree with it. What I was saying, I'm not at, so I'm on the same side of the fence. Let me clarify. What I'm saying is, you do not need to know the nitty-gritties of the Python programming language necessarily. And in fact, Python is very different from C++ anyway, and that's very different from assembly language. If somebody learns assembly language, I would in fact argue, that gives you much more of fundamental structures, or C or C++, and that's why the operating systems are written in C++. What happens is because you have done programming, we have something like a flow chart. So there's an if else, and it goes there, and there are decision trees. All of these concepts intuitively. We even when we have to prompt and tell that system, which is the black box, as to how to design the next system, what we have to understand is to be able to do that in our head without doing the programming, but good prompting. And even that is going to go out of the window. Like prompt engineering, which has developed, that's going to go out as well. But good prompting also requires us to have the basic capacity to, or the capability to understand the decision tree in itself, so that we can craft we won't have to craft the program itself, but we'll have to craft the right design so that it's more efficient or it's more effective. So let's say I have to achieve goals 1 through 5. The system AI will come up with something, but how do I evaluate that is good? To be able to do that, we have to have a structure in our brain which is able to evaluate it. That structure, I believe, comes from implementing some of these simple tasks, which, yeah, this is stupid. It's not, because that for loop, or what is a for loop, that understanding is a meta construct. It is not a for loop. It is an archetype of everything that is a for loop, in a sense. It is archetypical. So what I'm saying is, once the archetypes are created in our brain for something, then we are safe. You use all the tools, but create the archetype first. If the archetype is not created, then you are at risk of not being in a situation to actually be able to evaluate the system. You can rely on the system to improve itself, and maybe the system will be so smart that it can do better than us. But till then, I think I would argue that we should first develop the capacity and then use it to automate everything. So absolutely, I don't write codes anymore in the way I used to. And I do use ChatGPT for that. But the thing is, I have developed my own. I'm able to understand the code because I know how to code. But if I didn't, I would not be able to understand that, okay, this is actually unnecessary. We can drop that. We can replace. I don't think we'll have to do that, even that, in the future. But I think, let's say we are designing a website. ChatGPT can make websites today.
Right.
But what is a good website, what is a bad website, is actually our subjective understanding.
Right.
That understanding, how does it come up?
But that's an aesthetic taste thing, right?
Well, yes. In this case, so a website might be aesthetic, but let's say we are designing a website for efficiency. Let's say it's an e-commerce website. But yes, if it's aesthetic, that's tough. That's actually the toughest part of this entire paradigm.
Right.
AI understanding the aesthetics of humans. Man, I don't know how even that happens, because art is so subjective. I mean,
Yeah.
I was reading, I don't know whether you heard of this case. There was somebody who strapped a banana to a wall in Korea. And it was okay, I wouldn't say supposed to be art. It is art as defined by some people. Let's just say. And it's not art in my own book. But let the artist argue with me on that. So let's keep it that as a moot question. But let's say that's art. And a guy just went there and ate the banana.
Which is fine. Maybe that was the point of the art.
It wasn't, because the gallery replaced it with a fresh banana. They said they handed the man, and then they didn't press charges, which was good. And they asked him, "Why did you eat the banana?" He said it was ripe. But
it's food. Why is it on the wall?
Right? I mean, but in 2024 or 2023, when it happened, that is art. But in 1923, I tell you, no one would have called that guy an artist. But that's how.
But that's an evolution of sensibilities, though, right? I mean,
right.
And so, I mean, I look at some things on Pinterest, for example. I was just on Pinterest like an hour before we started. I shouldn't have, probably. And there's this kind of whole there's this whole genre of erotic wall art that you could buy for hundreds of dollars. Okay. And you could put it up in your wherever bedroom, living room. I mean, this is art. This is not pornography. This is not any kind of
No.
X-rated material. But it's like, oh yeah, this is cool. There's some naked people out there, and it looks actually pretty good until you realize what it is. So I'm like, okay, I mean, I wouldn't put it up in my house because my parents would visit. But I like it. I see the appeal in it, you know?
Yeah, it is. See, I'm on the side of using AI to generate your own stuff, your own T-shirts,
Yeah.
then using the 3D printer.
Yeah,
And
that'd be cool, wouldn't it?
you think about it. Today, we had to have an army of people to just function every day. Like
Right.
before the age of washing machines, like and there are people who live like that. You would wash your own clothes without with a if you wrote with a quill, you'd have to reload all the time. All of these are mechanical tasks which we have removed from our process even before AI. AI is just the last step. It is
Right.
taking care of some of the brain tasks that the brain did. But a lot of the things that we used to do as human beings were just sustenance activities.
Mhm.
They were not activities which actually give us pleasure in the sense of, I think in the Maslow's hierarchy, they're they're at the base.
Right.
But so if I like to cook, I would like to cook something experimental. I would like to understand, okay, I replace this with that. That's going to enhance the flavor. Then it might sometimes go wrong, but when it does go right, there's a feeling of pleasure. There's a feeling of
Dopamine hit. Yeah.
but if I just have to eat, I do not want to do the routine cooking all the time, right? That doesn't actually make me feel better. I would like to be the chef, but would I want to be the sous chef all the time? Or forget even the sous chef, would I want to be the person who cuts vegetables all day long? Because that's what cooking is. It is going to the grocery store, looking at the price label, picking it up. Sometimes it's useful because you pick the right stuff, but in a world which is getting more standardized, the amount of extra skill you require to pick the right vegetable is also reducing. So even that can be automated. So our daily regimen, if I compare that to somebody from the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, or even 19th centuries, their time was mainly spent in just
Survival. Yeah, existing. Yeah.
existing. And especially, I mean, India is quite blessed as a country in the sense that that's why India has always had a high population throughout history. Indian conditions just allow people to survive.
Wait,
But
I heard a different theory about this, I guess. So one of the reasons why we had this explosion of our population, it was something like 300 to 400 million in the 40s. India in the 1940s, that was the rough number. And so we've quadrupled, more than quadrupled, right? We were almost 5x it.
Right.
One of the reasons was that infant mortality was so high during the British times and things like that. Maybe this is the time to pull up Perplexity. There was kind of overcorrection for that high mortality. People started having 4 or 5 kids so that 1 or 2 would survive.
Right, that's true. I can actually, my grandfather is there. So he said he's the eldest among all the kids who were born, but I think there were people who were born before him who didn't survive, and there were so many children, and only 3 survived out of, I think, 6.
Yeah.
And there were others. I think he told me tales of 11 children and then only 4 or 5 survived.
Same with my grandma. My grandma was the one kid. She and her brother survived out of 12 kids. Can you believe it? 10 kids.
Right.
10 kids gone. It's
that's a whole different mindset of how you would treat life as well.
Yeah.
Of how you're going to treat loss and birth and death. And today, when people in the 21st century, treat a life, especially in the West. They don't quite understand that life is different in a country which is more populated, which has more people. But the point I was actually making was not India in the last 100 years. What I was talking about is, if one goes to Xuanzang in Chinese, I think even he talks of an extremely populated country 2,000 years ago. So India, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, was a crowded country, because Indian conditions, it's a fertile country, first of all. There are many rivers. There's the extremity in weather conditions is not as marked as, let's say, in Chicago.
Sure.
I mean, I obtain Abana champagne these days, and it's quite a shock from India, because it's so windy. The wind is so extreme that it can just blow you away. You have a suitcase with 23 kgs of stuff in it, and yeah, it can take its own ride with the wind. You have to hold on to a 23 kg suitcase if the wind's strong enough, and then who's holding you? So it's that bad at times. And cycling is actually dangerous, because you're cycling and then there's this gust of wind, and if it's coming from the side, you can be blown away to another car's lane. So it is actually dangerous in a real sense. And if you look at the extremities of temperature, -10, -15, -20 degrees Celsius. I was living in Ithaca before that. That's where Cornell is. And I don't know why they chose to build Cornell University there. Somebody called it like Manitoba or Manitoba.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Ithaca is gorgeous, but the in one day you could have rain, you could have snow, you could have fog, and you could also have the temperature going to the extent that one would require, undressing all of the extra clothing that one has. So the temperature goes from, if I say Celsius or Fahrenheit, I can use either, depending. The temperature would go from 15 degrees Celsius to -5 in the same day. In India, unheard of. Like, yes, you 20 degrees change in temperature, but one of them is not going to be freezing or below freezing. So how does one even plan for a day? Are you going to carry your umbrella, your down jacket, your sweater? How many things are you going to, and also your sunglasses, everything, because everything happens in the same day. Those were not conditions where a human being could have survived a few hundred years ago. Not easily. The movie Revenant, which Leonardo DiCaprio is battling a bear in one of the scenes. Those scenes really did happen quite recently, exactly where people are living in posh houses.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's probably happened a lot too. Bears mauling people.
Oh, that's Joe Rogan's jam.
Yeah. It is.
That's where this podcast turns into that podcast. But
Hey, so can you talk about why you got into this kind of, in your PhD, you're working with speech language impairment, application of LLMs towards SLI, I guess is the acronym you use.
Correct.
Can you describe what drew you to that particular problem and why LLMs?
Okay, so it doesn't have to be LLMs, I would say.
Okay.
If we look at AI has evolved, and AI is as old as the 40s or the 50s. In fact, the term is that old. Machine learning itself, I think, came in 1957 or something. So it's been around for a while. LLMs are really the latest iteration. And I mean, natural language processing has been around for a while in itself. What speech language impairment, now, if we look at that problem, it's related to language and the linguistic capabilities of a person who is. So if a child is, let me rephrase it. When a child is developing, they have to develop the structures within their brain to be able to process language correctly or effectively. And not everyone would do it the same way. There are different ways someone would do it. And there are different reasons one could qualify as speech impaired. Once someone knows that there is a problem, what's going to happen is um, you have to solve it by, let's say, encouragement or repetition, drill. That can be done, and that's done by teachers. Someone has to be empathetic and keep at it in order to teach that, no, this is the right thing and this is how you use language. Because we as human beings just intuitively understand. Let's say I do not understand what, let's say I go to Poland and nobody's speaking English, and Polish is really difficult. It's not even similar to the other languages which I know. How am I going to communicate? Well, the thing is, because I understand non-verbal communication, I'm still going to be able to function because I will use gestures, I will use blinks, I would use my arms, I would use hand gestures. One would still be able to get the point across. That's a part of language. One doesn't have to actually talk. A large part of communication is even being able to understand that the other human responds in this manner. Like autistic children don't really get it that way. For an autistic child, that understanding is not intuitive. And so it has to be made understood to that child that this is how other human beings perceive your communication, which is intuitive to others, and which is the unfortunate hand that autistic children have been dealt with. So LLMs, which are by definition large language models, they're mostly dealing with text at this stage. Of course, they're also processing video, not video, images. The going to the text part is also part of the journey. What I found doing this research is there are children who are non-verbal children who don't even vocalize. How are you going to use a large language model for a child who doesn't even talk? There's no text data to process.
What is the specific, sorry to interrupt you, but what is the specific thing you're trying to fix with the SLI children?
Right.
Are you trying to get them into speaking normally, or are you trying to kind of, either augment their understanding, or is it kind of providing an alternate way of communication rather?
Right, it depends. I would say it's really being able to, first of all, communicate. So for a child who doesn't use language at all, to get them to use language gradually. So, and for the children who are having certain problems, so let's say they have certain ways of pronouncing certain words, and you want them to pronounce it the correct way, the standard way. Someone is using incorrect grammar. These are more normal problems. Those problems you want to, so basically it's trying to standardize the communication and make them blend in with the natural world rather than stand out that this child has a problem. Make it the least obstructive to their daily functioning. That's the end goal. And it depends on where the children are in terms of their capabilities, because not every child would be able to reach the same level, but it's trying to get to the best level that child can achieve. It's a long process because for SLI affected children, the process of learning is going to be slower. And where AI can help is, if I look back to the example you were talking about music, it being really fun, what AI could potentially, it's not there, but what AI could potentially help in the future is the children might be able to get that independence to be able to play with the AI and develop the skills themselves to an extent. Because they would still be requiring the help, because the experts would have to design the right system so that AI is able to give the right input. But it is very important to be independent. The point I was making earlier about the 18th centuries is that we were not really independent. We had to rely on us doing, we were independent in some sense, but we had to do everything by our own hand. And today we can use a lot of tools and technology to just concentrate on the cognitive part. For SLI affected children, to get to the cognitive part is not easy. So if I have basic difficulties in communication, everything becomes difficult for me in life.
Mm.
Reducing that difficulty is going to also make me learn more things in life. It has a compounding effect over a lifetime. And this is really important to arrest early, because the earlier you intervene, the greater the effect. Because in school, we develop the social skills to be able to function in society. And especially this is parenting is so hard today, especially with all the knowledge. A child learns so much between the ages of a few months, then a year, then 2 years, then 4 years, then 6 years. There are certain skills which are to be learned in that time period. So if a child has a speech language impairment, it's quite important to intervene and to give as much help to the child to be able to learn as much in that time period, so that that golden time is not crossed.
Mm.
And that's why a lot of the work happens with children less than 2 years old. They're not older children. What usually people would think is 4-year-old and 8-year-old, but actually a large part of it is 2, 3, 4-year-olds. Because if the child is not that different, the other children playing are going to play more naturally. And that natural play is going to teach the child. Even lion cubs play, kittens play. Play is a very essential part of human development. So what's important is to have the right tools, I would say, if I say within our system as human beings, to be able to implement that play, or to be able to implement that learning that we are supposed to do in those foundational ages. As adults, though, there are more limited. The learning is far more limited, so the compounding effect is far more reduced. But with SLI affected children, the key thing is there's a shortage of the number of experts who can help such children. There's
Okay.
a singular shortage. So with AI, and with much smarter AI, the hope is that the existing teacher would be able to do the work of 3 teachers today. Because, I mean, everyone's talking of AI taking away jobs, but there is a job here. Just sign up for it and you'll get hired. But there aren't enough teachers to provide that job. So, but the children are suffering.
Right.
So if AI comes and saves the day, that's literally the knight in shining armor, I would say. So large language models, because they're able to understand language, it's still not happened. But because if the technologies improve, the rendering of the video output, the rendering of the audio especially, it becomes better. What a sophisticated large language model can do is be able to find out exactly where the child is having a problem in enunciating something, where's the hesitation. And then, because it's machine learning, so you put in enough data in the system, it's going to find patterns for the child. That, okay, this is where the child makes a grammatical error. These are the parts where the child is not able to pronounce. And so then you might be able to come up with a strategy to get the child to pronounce it correctly.
That's really cool, man. That's really cool. Yeah, I love that. And what drew you to this space? Like, why did you pick this particular kind of field of research?
Well, I'm doing plenty, several different things.
Oh,
like
yeah.
you asked
One of the
about
plenty things. Yeah.
But yes, this particular, I would say, I'm quite interested in neuroscience.
Okay.
Which you might have picked up. And the thing is, I'm interested in augmenting our skills as human beings. And when I find humans limited cognitively by something, I want to solve that problem. That's what I want to do at a fundamental level as a human being. That's what actually motivated me to come into and do my PhD in the first place. I wanted to develop technology that helps us humans be the best version of ourselves. So if that's automating away mundane tasks and freeing up your mind to accomplish something great, like you being able to produce a great piece of music you actually like, that's success. And that's the kind of thing I want to develop. It doesn't need to be about SLI affected children per se. It could be older adults in finance. But the thing is, it should be something that develops um, our cognitive ability. We can't really develop our cognitive abilities, necessarily speaking, which allows us to harness our cognitive abilities to the best of our to the best. So what happens is with SLI affected children, they are not able to harness that. And so it's a good problem to solve because not everybody actually is trying to solve it. I like to pick problems which people are not solving.
Okay. That's cool. More power to you, man. God bless.
More, well, that's the thing. There is less power by definition because not everyone is solving it. So
no, I mean, I think that's where there was some quote I was reading. The cave that you're scared to go into contains the treasure that you need. And I strongly believe in that. Like, it's if that's the problem that people are scared to, maybe there's a reason, because it's either hard or it's just too challenging. And then somebody like you are going in there with very noble intentions, which is like to actually help people reach their cognitive potential. It's like, it's fantastic. But you made a point earlier. I was wanting to challenge that. Like you said, cognition is you can't really grow cognition, and I'm thinking, but from my personal experience has been that there has been this kind of black and white moments for me where my cognition was kind of really poor and pathetic for a long time because of the belief systems that I had about myself. And then something happened, and then I got exposed to this plethora of cognitive skills that I actually had, and it was more psychological in that sense, and so, but I would be called dumb. I would if my parents are watching this, they would call me an idiot, a dull boy. In India they call you dull, right? Like, so
yeah.
That was purely like kind of like this, like brainwashing, so to speak, because you were put down so often in school. I was just an awkward kid. I ate meat in primary school, so I was always sat away from the kids who didn't eat meat. So all of these things sort of happened developmentally. I didn't kind of have the full experience, and I was a year ahead in my class. I was supposed to be a year after, so I was not even cognitively developed. So I had even more of the inhibitions I had because I was just not up to snuff. Especially when you're a kid, the cognitive differences are on a logarithmic scale, right? Almost
Yes,
like
yes.
1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And so because of that, I grew up with this sort of extreme sense of like, just like this different version of my cognition, like different. I always thought of myself as this kind of stupid kid, and then you realize later on in life, like I said, something happened, some black and white incident happened, and I was like, holy shit, I can think through this. I'm okay.
What age was that black and white incident?
Oh God, you're gonna embarrass me, Abhinav.
No, I mean, I'm just curious whether it was as an adult or it was
It was well into adulthood. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
That's why I'm embarrassed. No, I mean, let me be honest.
Why should you be embarrassed?
No, I'm embarrassed.
That's actually remarkable.
It's embarrassing because it's embarrassing because I went through such a large portion of my adult life not applying myself to the fullest extent that I could have, and I would be called stupid, or I would deliver. And you believe your story at some point, right? Like, if you're told you're stupid enough number of times, you start sort of believing it. Like, I'm not up to snuff. I can't do that. I'm not going to take up that challenge. Or I'm not going to pursue that. I'm not good enough. And it's sort of like it's a very limiting belief. And when that moment happened, well into my 30s or 40s, I'll just put it in the range. And it's like, holy shit. All I have to do is like, I have my own method of learning now, which is like, okay, repetition is one way to do it. And sort of like unconscious subconscious learning, things like that. I kind of leave it. I have a recipe of things, and it's like, I feel like I'm up to snuff. I can learn things. I can apply myself. I can do things. And it was like, I guess my point is that kind of cognitive capacity is also very psychological. It's not just a neurological limitation sometimes.
Right. So I'm not arguing against that. What I'm saying is actually a bit more fundamental. What I'm saying is, firstly, that is exactly why I'm doing research. I do not believe that we are cognitively limited, because there are plenty of psychological limitations and belief systems that we can work through and improve. So if we look at behavioral economics, for example, there are things called nudges, which economists just devise, which work to overcome those belief systems and get people to do behaviors such as save more money or prevent certain behaviors of of falling prey to scams, for example. You can get person to overcome foundational belief systems just by understanding cognitive science a bit better. But the thing is, what I'm talking about is something more fundamental, such as intelligence fundamentally. That is related to age. So we have fluid intelligence, we have crystalline intelligence. And there is, even if we look at creativity, if we look at the top compositions in various industries, in art, for example, you'd find when did the author or when did the poet or when did the painter paint this? You'd find that it's done in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s. The great painter is still painting great paintings in the 50s. The thing is, the top art may not have been achieved at the age of 59. The chances are that it was achieved earlier because there's a decline in fluid intelligence. However, it is not as if it declines off a cliff or something. What I'm saying is that intelligence itself, can it improve? That is not been done yet. I mean, there are the people who have made these claims, and it's not been proved, that you play this game and it makes you more intelligent. That's actually not true. But yes, playing that game could make you be able to harness some of your own capacity that you didn't even know existed. So if you learn to play chess and you play chess well, then you might start using a part of your brain that had forgotten that it existed. And yes, that's the kind of cognitive development that we can achieve. But can we improve the brain's capability itself that we were born with? That is not yet known. Although the brain might actually still learn a lot more than we know right now. It's a problem of not just psychology, but it's also a problem of biology, in the sense that neurons are dying and we have white matter and we have gray matter. And so you do have a decline over time, and you do have an increase in neural connections in the foundational ages. That's why the ages from 0 to 18, but the brain actually develops till even 25. And
but wait,
possibly,
I thought neuroplasticity was a thing that went to your grave. I mean, at least that's what the latest research kind of shows. I follow Huberman podcast, and one of the things he says is that there is no sort of like a line where the curve kind of drops off.
No, that is what the latest research says. But what happens is you have this huge body what's developed in the early ages, and then there's some development at the later stages. So you can make changes, but the extent of changes which are possible after, let's say, 30, 35 is going to be much more muted than in 20s, teens. But yes, you can always improve. And that's so wonderful to learn in itself, because we can keep on improving ourselves. And well, it might even be possible to improve intelligence itself. But I don't think enough people are doing research on that. But I think the easy, low-hanging fruit is being able to overcome the psychological hurdles that are preventing us from achieving our best self. So when you say someone calls you dumb, you're going to believe that you're dumb. It's like that elephant baby, which is tied with a chain to a pole. You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
And that's essentially what it is.
It is.
And I have some of my own beliefs in this regard. For example, I believe that the schooling system that we use, it tethers us.
Oh, absolutely, man. Say that emphatically.
You know it because you're on my side.
No, I
Going
mean,
when you
it's like anybody who looks at this objectively, the Indian education system should be able to arrive at the same conclusion that we're training a bunch of bots. We're not creating people who are thinkers. We're not creating people who can sort of. I mean, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about in your LinkedIn profile. Over and over, you put in critical thinking as a skill that you applied in many of these jobs that you worked in. And I love that. That is a fundamental kind of a building block of knowledge, like so to speak. If you talk about epistemology and things like that, like have the ability to reason very critically, sit down and sort of pause and think about these things for yourself, because that is a God-given gift, and which is exactly the opposite what we did in, at least in 80s and 90s when I was going to school and college and undergrad and all of that, was that we'll just kind of, shove this down your throat, and then you can just sort of like, write it out or whatever, and from memory, and then we'll, test you on that. We're not testing you on the application of that knowledge. We're not testing how much you can learn about, how have you learned how to learn. Have you developed a system in your mind so you can learn new things easy? Like we never taught that skill. Critical thinking, like all of these things, we're leaving so much on the table, and it shows. The outcomes kind of speak for themselves. Like there's so much room for just like you said, low hanging fruit in India, especially. I mean, this is across the board. I'm not singling out India. This education system in general, I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I think I wrote a blog about it too. But that is one of the things that bothers the hell out of me, is that this is one of the other aha moments I had later in my adult life, is that holy shit, I need to think for myself. Like there's something like, I was just like living as a script. I was a script boy.
I love that point you made about knowing how to think.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm interested in education in general.
Okay.
Whatever I do in the future as well, there's no doubt in my mind that I would be concentrating on education in some sense, because that's related to the cognitive development that I'm, again, very interested in. Because you talked about the Indian education system, but what's interesting is, if we look at what's happened in education in the last 40, 50 years, even in the West, in the United States, what's happened is we've replaced some of the exams with assignments. There's been major changes in how performance is assessed. There is something called an IEP, which every child has, individualized. What's interesting is that because of the standardization that has been attempted, it is still very, very bot-like. And what is, it's not just the Indian education system.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally, like I said earlier, I'm not singling out Indian education system at all.
Right. It's across systems. And the reason is people are trying to standardize everything. And that is where I have a problem with how society is functioning today. Because if you have to standardize, so for example, you have a factory which is making bread for you in a certain way, it's going to be different from the homemade bread that you're making. Or if I had, let's say, omelets which come from a factory, it's not going to taste the same way. I might like my omelet differently, but once you depend on factory omelets, you're going to just live with it. You're going to even forget the fact that an omelet can be different. Same way with an education system, a child is getting this as the education. Live with it is how societies. But actually, every child is so different.
Yeah.
And individualized. They claim to address that point, but it's not really individualized, because there is a specific format that the teacher has to fill out to basically judge the child's capabilities. But that format is highly standardized. They have to follow certain protocols. They can only say certain things. There's a very low level of subjectivity in the entire system. Because when you standardize, McDonald's has to make its burgers as similar in every establishment. That what is the end result? McDonald's has to use a lot of processed food. It cannot use food which is
Local
fresh,
ingredients. Yeah.
local ingredients, because
Right.
they have to standardize it. And
Yeah.
so when a huge bureaucratic edifice is created, that bureaucracy is really tying us down, in the sense that the individual teacher has very little capability to
Yeah.
influence outcomes, because
Totally.
they
Yeah.
have to fill this out. They have to take 10 exams and not 2 exams. They cannot take that decision to modify the curriculum, for example.
It's a
It has
tragedy. It's a tragedy. Yeah. It's like every one of us are born so uniquely with unique kind of proclivities and unique kind of skills and unique kind of interests in our lives. I was actually I've thought about this quite a bit. Like, why not, like, so just to give you some background, I started doing abstract artwork on my phone with a stylus, and man, I freaking enjoy this stuff. I fucking love it. I know I don't typically don't curse. I love it. It's just like it's so naturally. It came to me. It's been a year since I started it, and I scribble on it. It's a lot of like abstracts, figures and stuff like that. But I love it. I just love it. And I put it up on Behance and other places and stuff, and people appreciate it. Whatever. It's satisfying to me. But the thing I was thinking is that, man, if I only, as a kid, I wish I knew I had this sort of aptitude and found this joy in just scribbling. When kids scribble on the walls with crayons and stuff, like, and we say don't scribble, and it's like, well, that is the essence of it. If the kid wants to scribble, the kid is getting some kind of a dopamine hit in his head or her head that is making him drawing this person to that thing. So get that person to that and grow on that, because that person could be the next greatest thing at that thing. Because you're starting it at like what, 3 years of age, 2 years of age. Like, just start off with vocation. Start off. We don't. I don't need to learn calculus. At all. For example, like I'm just kind of making a general statement that calculus never came useful for me. And okay, so I learned mathematical principles. I understood how people kind of figured these things out. Physics and stuff like that. Okay, great. But from a vocation standpoint, like I would say, from a quality of life standpoint, I should say, is like, I think my quality of life would have been very different. I know I'm speaking about a counterfactual here, but like that thing, like playing basketball, doing art, and these were things that I like to do. Like, we would be living in much more kind of a fully actualized society where people are actually doing the thing that brings them the infinite amount of joy, not being a bot in an office stuck behind 9 to 5 kind of thing. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But there are a lot of people for whom which that is not the thing, and they're sort of like living the other life.
I think a part of the problem is monetization, which you
Right.
alluded to.
I totally agree with you. And I'm not like rose-colored glasses here. Abhinav, is that I guess what I'm proposing is that this is a social re-engineering kind of a task that humanity has to embark on. How do we, like, embark on this kind of, completely paradigm shifting kind of way of thinking about how incentives are aligned? Like, there is a market for art. There is market for good art. I mean, like, not just any kind of art. Good art, good music, good movies, and people pay in some form or the other to get that stuff, right? Like, they want to pay for this. They want to give the money. So imagine that we all become great artists in whatever form. It doesn't have to be one particular medium, any kind of art, and we all become artists, and we're the goddamn best at it. We're all the Miles Davises of programming computers or something like that. We're the best, whatever it is, whatever your proclivities are, you sort of grow in that space rather than playing somebody else's game, which is what we're doing in a lot of cases. Like, the education is grooming you to play good at somebody else's game. Like, oh, you can be a computer programmer. Okay, well, that gives me good money, but then I actually enjoy this other adjacent profession. I wish I could do that all the time. And it's hard even to envision that life, that kind of a future, because so many of us, probably in the billions, are doing the thing that we're probably not the right fit for. because this education system has kind of spit out this army of bots. These army of bots have to be just farmed out to these places, and then we just do the. There's this one Steve Jobs that is fucking amazing at what he does, and then he employs like whatever 300,000 employees.
Right, right.
And we could have like maybe 7 billion Steve Jobses, or something like that.
I don't think that's actually possible because there is a sort of bell curve in terms of human capabilities in various fields. So I believe that someone who is really good at making movies, for example, they're going to be able to make so even when, and I believe this to be true, in 2 years, we might be able to create movies ourselves with a few prompts.
Sure.
But I believe that Steven Spielberg would still make a better movie than me.
Yeah.
Even if I have the same resources as Spielberg does.
But at least you'll have Steven Spielberg, and then you have the next slab. It's a huge slab of a lot of not as good as Spielberg, but they're all unique. They're doing their own thing. They're all self-actualized. They wanted to make movies. They don't want to be Spielbergs. They can just be good to the level that they realize that, I'm good enough, man. I'm having a good time, and it's like, maybe I'm spending too much time on Reddit too. I read a lot of I read a lot of people bitching about their work.
Right.
I mean, on Instagram too, I've gotten into this bad habit where some of these reels I watch where people just mocking corporate America, they just. And then what they do to make it even more clickbaity is that they say, this is a real scenario sent by somebody. It's like, oh shit, everything is gloom and doom.
Well, I'm not on the side of gloom and doom, but
me neither.
Okay. But there is a lot of gloom and doom. We have to be aware of that.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that this 9 to 5 is actually optimistic, because in India it's more like 9 to 9.
Yeah.
At least when I used to work in Citibank, and I had a pretty good working life, I would say, if I compare it to most people. But the thing is, we have this thinking in India, and especially if you go east towards Japan, to Korea, there's this culture that work is life. And even after work, you're still supposed to socialize with co-workers, and it's accepted as a norm. I believe.
Oh, really? Is that how it is in Korea and Japan? You just kind of hang out with your workmates and that's about it?
Your boss is there, and so you cannot really decline.
Really?
In Japan, yes. Why?
Holy cow.
The problems in Japan are. I'm not Japanese. I cannot claim to understand Japanese culture. So if anyone is Japanese, they can say it in the comments and comment. But I've watched plenty of Japanese stuff, and I've read a fair amount of literature on this as well. What I have understood is there are fundamental reasons why the salary man, as they call in Japan, have been on the decline. The salary men have been on the decline in the last couple of decades. I mean, there was the Asian financial crisis. There's the crash of the Nikkei. But there are fundamental factors which are preventing people from enjoying a good work life. And this is related to people not being able to voice out their concern. So in India, people are going to say, I will not do this. Let me, as somebody says, laptop sar pe maar ke. But that's not going to happen in Japan. In Japan, sort of rebel would just not come up from within. So what's going to happen is people are just going to be compliant and go along with it. And so your way of not complying would be, you would not become an office worker in the first place. You would only go for part-time jobs. You would play computer games. You would not develop those skills in school because you ultimately do not want that life. But the fact that you're going to go there in that corporate hierarchy and then not join the boss in the after drinks, or if the boss is staying till 8 p.m. at night working, you cannot leave before the boss. Is that So in certain Indian workplaces also, that's true.
Yeah.
You will not leave before the boss leaves. And if you do, the boss is going to say. But this is where we as humans can draw the line and say, to hell with you. I've done my work. You don't want me. You don't like my work. Hire someone else. I'm going to stay. I'm not saying that you should not do your work. What I'm saying is we have to draw a line somewhere. And that kind of drawing of lines, one learns to do if one actually knows where to rebel and where to be compliant. That's the kind of intrinsic skill that we have to learn as children. What happens in certain societies which are more communist or more communal in a
Yeah.
sense is that
Collectivist.
collectivist. We do not learn to rebel. But there's the other side of the equation. There's a societal cohesion also which happens because of that. In the West, which is more individualized, it's not as if the children, so there you would have the children taking a lot more liberties in class. But does that actually mean that they're not following the same grind in corporate culture later on? I mean, they might change jobs more often and they might take different decisions. But I would say even in the West, there are certain norms that they're following. For example, they want that Instagram life. Why do they want that life? Have they really thought of what substructures have been embedded in their minds that make them crave that particular kind of lifestyle? If you want that lifestyle, make that decision for yourself. Don't have Instagram decide that this is the life you should have. In Japan, the problem is that they have just assumed that this is what happens in society. And so the men who want to rebel against it, they have just checked out of marrying, of holding a steady job. Because to hold that job, I mean, I'll tell you how bad it was. In 1997, you had the Asian financial crisis. The graduates who graduated that year, I don't remember the exact Japanese term now, but there's a particular term for the students who are passed over, because you graduated that year and the next year there was no hiring. 2 years later, there's a fresh crop of graduates who would be hired. All those people who graduated those 2 years, they will not be picked by the companies. They would pick the new class. Now, if I were an HR recruiter, I would have the compassion to also hire from that pool. But I don't know why they didn't do that. I don't know what made the human resources managers in that age not do that. But they aren't doing that. I don't even understand how, and I'm not picking on the Japanese here, but what I'm saying is that a society, when it's created this norm that no, hiring will be done in this batch, in the latest batch only, people only with 3 years of work experience are going to be hired for this job. That's absolute bollocks, because how do you know what's the quality of those 3 years of work experience? A person could be smart enough through 2 coding projects or through work projects in their school and beat somebody with 3 years of work experience. Have they done an empirical study to actually check whether the person with 3 years of work experience is better than a person with 3 months of experience? They haven't. They've just assumed it. But because that assumption has been put into the job requirements, the specifications, we have entire cohorts of students trying to fit themselves into. They will work in a particular industry for these many years. They will do that after those many years. Have people even tried to understand, to think and reflect who is living their life?
Yeah.
Some ghosts decades past had created an HR policy, and that is going to be deciding your today. I think it's really
It's pretty bollocks, man. I totally agree with you. Like that we haven't innovated in our like education system, career paths, and things like that. Like there's so much room for social innovation in all of these areas, you know. And the current iteration that we're in, which is like, you know, you most majority of the people go get an education, a degree, maybe an advanced degree, and then get into a corporate job, and then you ascend the ladder, and then you're what, you know, you get some social credibility, blah blah blah, and then what? At 60, you're going to retire, and then what? Because until 60, the majority of your life you spent, if you're doing middle management, let's say, which is a pretty high point in a person's career, let's say, okay, you've reached middle management. If you check out at, let's say, 58 to 60, now what are the skills and what are the kind of the frameworks you have in your mind, your brain, like, talent frameworks or cognitive frameworks and things like that, to take you from 60 to 90 or 60 to 100 or 60 to 110, which is we're inching towards the kind of life expectancy, right? So we're talking a good 30, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of life where you've just not prepared yourself for that kind of a life. And it's kind of a cliched thing where they say, "Yeah, I'm going to play golf and play my grandkids." What if you don't? What if you want to be that wise kind of Yoda character who has the wisdom, who's gained wisdom over the last 20, 30 decades or whatever, or 2, 3 decades or whatever, and then you want to give back. You want to be part of something much greater. And I don't see that happening, because there's this kind of artificial kind of 60, you retire, and you see, I see just like wasted minds, because the way we design these systems, like wasted minds going to just atrophied minds, things like minds that have just done one thing for the last 20, 30 years, like one thing or two things or whatever. They're really good at being an accounting professional. They're really good at being a frontline manager of 30 people or something like that. Okay, so you've gained some basic cognitive skills. You can manage some people. Okay, so how are you going to translate this into the quality of your life for the next 30 years? Even that requires a lot of re-engineering, right? Like, because we're leaving a lot on the table as a humanity. We're leaving all of these people that could be just wise people because they've seen life for so long compared to you and me, compared to the younger generation. And then they continue to earn the respect of the younger generation, unlike which is you get called a boomer, and then you just get disrespected and things like that, right? Like, we can fix all of that. We can fix all of that with it's a complete like overhaul of the system, where you say, all right, do the thing that you will potentially, let's train humanity to do the thing on day one that this person will naturally, organically traverse till the deathbed, where this person has gained so much of a proficiency and the mastery over this thing, where these people are great. And this is not just kind of me pondering over. You brought up Japan earlier. A lot of these artisans in Japan, they produce like this really fine things. They're really, really old people. Like, they're in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Why? Because they love doing it. They've honed their craft for so many decades, and they've just gotten so good at it. They produce the best kind of a product, whatever the product is. I have a pair of sunglasses from Japan. It's called Dita, and it's like super expensive. But man, I literally will stare at it every now and then, because it's handmade, it's so well crafted, and you can tell that this person, whoever was making it, kind of hand brushed it, kind of like installed everything by hand, because there's such of this kind of imperfections you can find, but it's perfect as the end product. And yeah, I really don't. If I had a school tomorrow, a school project, that's how I would do it. But this is just me pontificating on my soapbox, like, this is the way it should be. And we're kind of like put into these cookie cutter things. We're just kind of like, have you heard of that term Procrustean bed, by any chance?
Yes.
It's like this Procrustean bed. We're all being kind of chopped off at the feet just so we can fit in that bed for that night. And then
I agree, and that's exactly why that example of the Procrustean bed is something I use all the time.
Okay.
Japan is also one of the most hardworking countries on the planet.
Yes.
There are advantages of that system, and that is why Japan is one of those remarkable countries which has achieved extreme skill in warfare, for example, earlier. Then you have in 3 or 4 decades, Japan developed the capacity to challenge European powers. In 3 or 4 decades after the Second World War, it was able to be unrivaled master in technology, in electronics. It's a remarkable country. But what it does is, what is our aim as a society? Is it achieving greater joy, in a sense, for the average human, I would argue that um, uh, human beings as individuals will have to learn how to think in a very fundamental sense. Learning hard work as a society is a great skill, but like you were talking about calculus, we have to take our own decisions about whether we want to learn calculus, but we should be given the chance to learn calculus.
We should be also
Calculus,
taught, we should also be shown what advantages you will get if you learn calculus,
right,
and you can do this and this and this. Well, I'm not interested in that. Then don't learn it. There's that kind of fork in the road constantly. And to be able to make a good decision, you have to have the prerequisite tools in your mind to think, okay, I want to do X, and calculus is not going to take me there.
right. So what's really important is, I feel that the decision to take calculus or not take it should be an informed decision.
Mhm.
It is, if we are talking about children, there is this tendency to choose the lazier path. It's easy. There's self gratification. You like playing video games. You're going to play video games all day. That the Japanese drill system has this one great thing. It teaches you very strong work ethic from a young age. That work ethic carries you a long way. It might restrict your life in many ways as well, which is why one should have the choice. But to learn that work ethic is a very, very important skill. So if one has the work ethic, let's say, and then one decides that regardless of that, I still want to play basketball and I'm going to be pretty good at it, and it's also going to earn me enough to be able to sustain my life, that's what you should choose, regardless of the fact that everyone is being a salaryman. Or in India, everyone is going into IT engineering today. And that is not what you need to do. You don't have to join Google or Microsoft to become happy in life. That is not what's required in life, or be an civil servant. In a few decades prior, it was civil service. And if we go into, for example, China a few centuries back, and even today, again, the civil service, people would study 20, 30 years and take the civil services examination, and they would be very proud of clearing it at the age of 30 or something. And that's all they have done. And I know that you would get the prestige. You can go from the bottom to the top through that one examination. But it should be one's own choice of why I want to be a civil servant. Do I really have it from within my soul that I want to do it? Or am I just following societal norms that the civil servant is at the top of the hierarchy, and so I'm doing it because I want to be at the top of the hierarchy?
Yeah.
But why do you want to be at the top of the hierarchy is a very fundamental question.
Yeah.
I don't think that's asked often enough by people to themselves. So I think when we decide that we want to learn calculus or not, some good teacher should be able to show the students that this is what you actually develop as mental structures when you understand calculus, when you understand differentiation, when you understand integration. This is what, but I don't think even most teachers really understand why calculus is important or why algebra is important. Because algebra develops abstract reasoning, for example.
Yeah.
Like everybody, people have asked me a lot of times, like, I'm an engineer like you.
Mhm.
Why do engineering and then go into finance, for example? The thing is, engineering, so even when I'm doing civil engineering or basic mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, I do not have to apply electrical engineering, because if I have to go into transformers, I have to understand it at a level which a couple of years of engineering would not actually prepare me for. So I'll have to do a lot more training on the job to be able to actually do my job. It's just building a small base. But what engineering does to you is it teaches you to do basic problem solving. It teaches you to take a problem apart and solve it bit by bit. The divide and conquer, which was the strategy used by the British to conquer India. But that's exactly what you use in computer science to code, to break down a problem. That skill is very fundamental. If a student doesn't have that kind of skill, then the student misses out on many. Everybody doesn't have to learn everything, but
Right.
that student would not be capable of solving some set of problems. And so it's very hard for me to say really what calculus or algebra or a particular part of a curriculum really achieves. But what I see, especially because I was seeing curriculums in the United States, for example, and I've seen plenty of curricula in India. I've seen how they're just shallowly trying to touch a subject and
Yeah.
have people rote memorize or maybe do a project on it, tick some boxes, and we have taught that subject. No, if a student just learns one thing very, very well, that will create an entire set of mental structures that you were alluding to earlier,
Right.
which would enable them to solve larger problems in life. Even if it's just music, if you learn it at an advanced level, that's going to be far more useful than learning 40 subjects, but in a very shallow way.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you're definitely making my point that, we almost have to have a screen at a very young age for kids where we understand what their proclivities are, what their aptitude is for to your early point, like about Japan having this work ethic. I have a different take on that. I strongly feel this is personal, my personal opinion, as well as what I've seen on the, people talk about these things, is that like hard work, yes, indeed, it is necessary ingredient. It is absolutely necessary. It is the core ingredient of what gets great things done. But there's this virtuous cycle that gets initiated when you have this dopamine hit, that whenever you're challenged with something just above your current skill level and you attain that thing, there's this dopamine hit. So that dopamine hit is the thing that kind of takes you the next level. It draws you in and draws you in. And to a outside person who's looking at it in two dimensions, it looks like, oh, you're working really hard. What you're doing is you're chasing that next dopamine hit because you're just enjoying that pursuit. You're enjoying the fruits of what you're working on in such a deep kind of a flow state way, so that you don't even have to be pushed to work hard. You're just waking up and doing the thing.
Yeah. That's what you want to ideally achieve. That's why I said what's dangerous in today's world is someone doesn't learn what is a flow state.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, with all the distractions that happen today, and it's very hard to achieve a flow state because you get interrupted so often, and there are so many
Turn
distractions.
the interruptions off. That's what I say.
And
I mean, I turned off all my. I still have my interruptions, my notifications and stuff, only for the absolutely critical thing. And I feel like that's another like craft that you have to kind of maybe work at, is that understand like 80% of those interruptions are unnecessary to attend to. So you could pretty much mute them out. And the 20%, okay, let that in. And it's, again, I feel like it's a muscle. It's like a muscle that needs to, like wanting that quick, cheap dopamine through our, phones and that stuff like that is a bad habit. And the bad habit can be broken with not attending to that bad habit.
right. Rajiv, can we take a quick 1 minute break?
Sure, man. Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're back. Good timing.
Yeah. So you were talking about the dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty anachronistic as far as current day people. I often have my phone off, or I don't even know where it is.
That's great.
Despite that, and that's why when I achieve good work, it's really in a flow state when it's uninterrupted, because I don't really rely on technology all that much. I rely more on my own brain. But the thing is, even the way we structure our day, if we have meetings in between, we have the way we do that is going to affect our ability to deliver in terms of our work output. So the flow state takes an hour or two to achieve, or maybe 30 minutes, but it takes a few minutes, and then you can't stay in flow state for too long. You could, but then you can't achieve flow state every day in that case. So if you write, for example, if one is a writer, to be able to write creative, fiction, let's say, one would have to be in a flow state and not get interrupted by an email, let's say.
Yeah.
So the phone should not ring. So even if there's a phone call which comes in between, that's going to affect that state. And it will take a few minutes to get back. I was listening to Andre Karpathy, the AI engineer, and he, for example, was talking about his best projects that at times he would just shut himself off for 3 days
Mm.
and not have any communication with anyone. I mean, let's not say any, but virtually none for those 2-3 days, because he's creating, he's actually innovating. You cannot innovate if on a schedule. You cannot have, I will innovate between 6 p.m. and 7
Right.
p.m. That is not how you compose poetry. I compose some poetry, and I have
cool.
just, huh?
I was saying that's really fantastic. That's cool.
Right. But I don't do it often enough. Because I'm rarely in a situation where I can have a few hours which are not leading on to something else. The thing is, if I know I have a meeting at 7 p.m. and I'm sitting at 4 p.m., that's nagging at my mind.
Right.
3 hours is not enough for me to really conceptualize doing this work. Now, you can do work, but can you do creative work with 30 minutes? I mean, you can, but it's not something which is ideal. What is ideal is have to have nothing nagging at your mind and just let it explore. And that's going to create something that is not predictable. So the school is good in many ways, because it teaches you to socialize with people. It teaches you what is discipline, what is organization. But at the same time, it also prevents us from really harnessing our capabilities, because we have forgotten how to let our mind explore. So even when I make a schedule, my ideal schedule would not have this between 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Instead, it would be a large block of time of several hours, and I would roughly want to accomplish this. But it's a bit nebulous, because I do not want to straitjacket my thinking if I'm actually creating something. So the larger point I'm really making is that when we are trying to over-engineer society, we are doing too much. I don't think we are allowing humans to really be free in a fundamental sense. I think freedom is what we are losing most in the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with you. Freedom is I used to hear these kind of cliches. I thought it was cliches originally when I came to America, which is like, freedom and everything is freedom, and freedom. There's a price for freedom, and then all of these things. And I realized once I quit my corporate gig, is like, this is what people mean, which is that you have control over your own time. You have the ability to choose how you're going to use your time in the way you want to, and nobody could put a barrier to that. And it sounds very kind of cliched and very mundane when I say it, but having felt it in the first person, and especially somebody who never had that kind of a conceptualization of what freedom meant, doing something, whatever you want with your time, it's like oh, this is what people mean. And you realize, like, for yourself, like, oh shit, this is what it really means. I could sit down and do the thing that brings me happiness, or whatever gets me into flow state, or whatever the hell I want to do. Very underappreciated, man. I feel like, especially in India. I mean, I travel quite often to India as well. This concept of freedom there's different interpretations of it. It's a very different interpretation than what it is in America, for sure. That much I can say, without getting too much off into the weeds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even in America, what has happened is, over the last few decades, that freedom has been encroached on.
Yeah.
For example, with the NSA, I don't really need to say much.
Yeah.
I think everyone listening knows. I mean, Snowden came up with so many revelations, and
God bless. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is that a lot of the people intuitively know that, yeah, we are being snooped on. So, how can you live? How can you accept that? And in India, that acceptance comes more naturally than in the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah, yeah,
That is actually something I really like about the United States, that
yeah.
the people would not give up their freedoms. They
Absolutely,
would even die for it if
yeah,
necessary.
absolutely.
But there
Yeah,
is that fundamental love for freedom I really respect in the
yeah.
United States.
Me
And
too, man.
I don't think we have that in Asia enough. I'm not saying you have to not follow what's good for society, let's say. You don't have to follow norms. There should be nothing like traditional values. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is people should still take their own decisions. So when I'm saying free, it doesn't mean you become, you go to the alternatives and then you follow something which is more cool as an alternative. That this is what, people like us do. No, you actually are free to take your decision. If you want to do something, if you don't want to live a corporate lifestyle, for example, you know why you don't want to live a corporate lifestyle. Not just because everyone is living a corporate lifestyle. I have to be different. So I not do corporate lifestyle. That is like putting a not operator in
Right.
front of it. Yeah? And so you're as robotic. I mean, from a logical structure standpoint, you're exactly as chained as a person who is on the corporate side. But if you genuinely like nature, for example, then you live in the woods. That's fine. But if you're living in the woods because you don't like society, that's a very different motivation.
Yeah, the,
Um,
the the kind of thing I would calibrate, like, I feel like we might have folks in India roll their eyes at what we're talking about, in that, oh, what do you think? We don't have freedom in India, So what the kind of the defining freedom I would say that an American can use today is that, like, we watched the other day Elon Musk say, go F yourself to Bob Iger, right? In front of, like, all of these people. And it was just like a very accepted thing. Or, remember that whole meme about, let's go Brandon? Remember that? Basically, I don't know if you remember that. So, let's go Brandon was a chant in NASCAR. So they had a NASCAR race, and then there was Brandon, one driver, and they were interviewing some guy, and then the crowd breaks out, F Joe Biden, F Joe Biden, F Joe Biden.
right. I know that
And,
one. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and it became a meme, and said, "Oh, it's F Joe Biden." This reporter said, "Oh, they're all chanting, 'Let's go, Brandon,'" and then people have that freedom with impunity. You can absolutely criticize authorities in America and not feel the heat. And in India, you try doing that. Try doing that. Like, I was in fact, I have to share a anecdote with you about Bhopal, actually, Abhinav, which was very unsettling for me. Actually, it was quite unsettling, and I just kind of like, man, I thought Bhopal was like this jewel in the crown of India, but this sneakily. So anyway, I was in the Bharat Bhavan. So fantastic, dude.
Yeah.
It blew my mind to go to that place. I went to Bharat Bhavan. I went to Manav Sangrahalaya, and
Oh,
both
yeah.
those places just blew my mind as to the depth and the richness of the artifacts that they have, and just to
Yeah.
know that in India we have this kind of a depth and richness of art and artifacts, and all of these kind of cultural artifacts and heritage and stuff is fantastic. Anyway, so I was in Bharat Bhavan. So, and at 7 in the evening on Friday, this was on a Friday, I'd gone there. they there was a play that was being put up by, I believe, a small theater group, enacting how the Nawab of Bhopal finally conceded Bhopal, like, I guess, the kingdom of Bhopal to the Republic of India. And so there was a play enacting the whole thing. The play was supposed to begin at 7 o'clock, and it didn't begin until 7:30. I was pissed because there was this, for the lack of a better word, I'll probably, like, there was the Orange Brigade showed up, and with their chants, and I'm sitting there like, dude, I just want to enjoy a play. And so I was not chanting along with the crowd, and they were pointing out whoever was not, in a very kind of a threatening way, and saying, you better say, Jay, blah blah blah. And I'm like, dude, this was not the India that I'm used to. And I've been to India ever since I moved to the US many times, and I know things have been whatever changed and stuff, but this was quite extraordinary to me, that it was kind of this almost like a fascist way of interacting with that too, in Bharat Bhavan, one of the most liberal places of arts and everything out there. And this Orange Brigade wanted to force people and me to conform to a certain kind of ideology and say, hail so and so. And I'm like, man, that is like the opposite of like what we were talking about, like the freedoms, right? Like, hey, in America, if you say, I don't believe in this, I don't want to partake in this, okay, have at it. It's okay, man. It's your right. It's a fundamental right. We encoded that into the Constitution. Every man and woman can pursue their own happiness. They have a right to bear arms, and they have a right to freedom of speech. And I mean, I'm looking at that anecdote really shook me up to what the reality was, and say, man, it's like, I spoke to several people. I spoke to Uber drivers, hotel guys, and all of that, like while I was there, just to get a sense. It seems like the public is on board with what I'm saying. Like, everybody should be allowed to do what they want. But they also acknowledge the fact that there is this kind of coercive force out there, mainly kind of a political coercive force that's kind of like imposing on them.
Yes. Okay. We went to Bharat Bhavan yesterday.
Oh, in India. Okay. Good deal, man.
Yeah, Bharat Bhavan is a great place.
Mhm.
So to any person hearing this, I would actually first let me talk of the positives of Indian freedom. India is very laissez-faire, and there's this Jio or Jine Do, the live and let live
Yeah.
concept in India, which I really like, and it is sort of related to the Hindu way of living across the centuries. So it's quite old. In India, there are things you can do which make life a lot freer than in the United States in certain ways. For example, parking is such a nuisance in the United States. Strangely, when there is so much parking, whereas in India there's almost no parking. But in the United States, it becomes really hard because this is a handicapped parking space. This parking space is reserved for so and so person from this time till that time. Well, in India,
Isn't it good to have handicap parking spots? Isn't that a humane thing?
handicapped parking spots are a humane thing. However, when one designs a city, one has to see who are the people in that city. If there are pedestrians, if there are college students who do not necessarily all have a car, they would prefer to have that as green space.
Okay.
Or as
Yeah, fair
something
point.
else.
Yeah.
Instead, what the building regulations in the United States do is, no, every person who erects an apartment building has to have so many parking spots.
Yeah.
That pushes up real estate prices horrendously because you have to build up so much extra stuff. And who decided that? Was there any empirical assessment of what people want in their ideal society? No. In fact, a few people who had cars, who had a lot of resources, they came up with those laws many decades ago. So yes, there is freedom, but there is freedom within a very structured format. In India, where you have a thela, a push cart, you have very different vehicles plying on the road simultaneously. It looks chaotic, it looks unorganized, but it is an organized kind of chaos in the sense that people are deciding on their own how to travel, and the system does not impose their whims in many ways. Whereas in, let's say, the US, it's disciplined, yes, but then it's worked because some of those rules were very good. But it's not as if all of them have been introspected in detail. It's just that some of them were so good that it has produced excellent output. But it's not that all of them, for example, housing crisis, we can look at housing crisis, we can look at the construction, at the economic side of things, and what causes increasing inequality in American society, for example. And we can find that it comes to very fundamental factors. But I'm deviating. If I talk about Indian freedoms, I think there is this. I totally agree with you about that. I have that revulsion with the to how the, let's say, the Orange Brigade
Yeah.
would be imposing, and it's not to do with religion or something. It's basically I should have the choice to not chant.
Yeah.
There was this movie called Billu Barber a few years ago,
Mm.
and they had to rename that to Billu alone
Oh wow.
because the word barber was considered to be um, derogatory,
Mm.
which is not true. First of all, I don't understand how calling somebody a barber can
Right.
be derogatory point in that I just don't understand how that happens. But apart from that, it's just that one. And barbers are not really organized. It's not as if India has this huge cabal of barbers, right?
Right.
Some people in Bombay or some other city, they got together and said, we should get some publicity. Let's go after this movie because I don't like it. And well, nobody should give that currency, whether it's on Twitter or anywhere else. You cannot have some people decide for others what they want to see. I mean, I would don't want my if I were a barber, I wouldn't want that barber association in Bombay deciding for me whether I want Billu Barber to be called Billu Barber or not. That's the filmmaker's choice. They should run with it. If I don't like it, I shouldn't go watch the movie. And I can write a blog post. I can complain on Twitter, yes, but I'm not going to organize and shut down the movie itself. That should be the filmmaker's right to freedom. And I think in India, what is lacking is that people put up with authority clamping down way too much. I think there should be that kind of rebellion which happens in America whenever somebody tries to impose something that draconian. However, when the Patriot Act was passed in 2001 or 2002, after the 9/11 attacks, well, it got passed. NSA has increasingly added surveillance. Facebook and all the other companies, big tech, are regulating and they're the biggest thing right now is misinformation. They're saying what is misinformation, and yes, we high priests of society know what is information and what is misinformation, and we are going to decide for you because we are graduates from the Ivy League. I speak as an Ivy League graduate myself. I don't know. How do you know? But people who advocate themselves to be high priests, they're extremely dangerous, whether they be in India or the United States. In India, it comes in the guise of religion.
In India, there's also the other dynamic in India is that there's a monopoly on kinetic force, where you don't have the monopoly on kinetic force in America. So the right to bear arms, for example, is a very explicit right given to people to say you can own kind of firearms that are lethal, and that is kind of a balancing force at some level. But then you look in India, of course, you don't have the right to bear arms. And if you want to get a firearm, it's a very, very, very difficult process to get it. And I mean, look, since I follow this other podcast called Seen and the Unseen. I don't know if you heard of this guy. He's a journalist, Amit Verma is his name. And I really like that guy. Anyway, so he makes the point that in India, when we got freedom in the 40s, and this is written as well. This is not just his opinion. When the dawn of freedom in 1947, 1948, India was like this cauldron, like boiling over with communal issues, like people bludgeoning each other, people burning up trains and buses, and it was just like chaotic when the birth of India happened. And the state was at risk from the population, so it was the power was tilted toward the people, and the state had to protect itself from the people. So the laws were drafted such that the state had monopoly over a lot of violence, monopoly over kinetic force, and unfettered like unleashing of your force, and that always continued. The government is not going to take back the power that they've been given, and today we have this kind of like atmosphere, so to speak, where yeah, you really can't say much, because guess what? The police will show up at your doorstep and will beat you. And that's a very real thing. Police brutality is a very real thing in India. We don't talk about it enough, but that is the kind of the difference in dynamic between the US and India. I'm not trying to just pitch US and India here. Europe has its own, way it deals with things, and China and Japan, like, they all have their mechanisms. But that is one of the things that we've basically zip. We're not going to do much. I mean, I've followed this this one Lankesh. She's a journalist, and man, she got shot, point blank in her house. And the guys who shot, and she was a journalist, and she was writing about the government, and nothing was done after that. And these are like example crimes, right? Like when people look at something like that, they're like, "Hey, I'm not going to deal with this ever. I'm just going to shut up. I'm going to deal with what's told to me, and this is great. I'm going to just go along with the program, and I'm really not going to say much because my life is at risk." And I think that's a huge disincentive, right? Like to speak up online or say something negative there's a huge downside. Like if you do something like that, the power asymmetry, the kinetic force asymmetry will just squash you, and you will be forgotten the next day.
Yeah, and I would say I have that problem against any government in a sense. So I am
Sure.
for the side of limited government, and
Yeah.
not the way, let's say, the current Indian government, for example, defines maximum governance and minimum government. Or something.
Yeah.
We have that motto, but what it has translated into is less number of civil servants, which I don't agree with. I think India should have a much bigger bureaucracy, not bigger bureaucracy, but more people in the bureaucratic system, because there aren't enough people to actually run the country. We definitely need more people, good people there.
So Abhinav, I have a great segue, if I may interrupt you there. I have a wonderful segue. I actually put it down in my... That is one of the things I wanted to actually discuss with you, is that, with the advent of AI that we have today, do we need the size of the bureaucracies that we have in India? For what I'm getting at is that, like, let's say you want to buy a house, you have to go get a license from here, a building permit from there. You have to go to the corporator. You have to get this checked and passed and cleared and approved and blah 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 blah. All of these human clerical steps, I should say, administrative clerical steps, could be first of all, robotically automated. We don't even need large language models and things like that. You eliminate all of these things. Like I use this one of these tools called Zapier. I don't know if you've heard of Zapier. Zapier is like this API tool that you can automate all your things. So what I do is in my Google Sheets, I'll put lines of things I want to post on social media, and it just does it for me. So I don't have to individually log in, right? So you could have that kind of a robotic process automation, which is fairly straightforward. But then you could also integrate learning into it, like some sort of AI learning into it, where credit worthiness and things like that. Like, okay, so you could learn some information about this demographic, and then what are their chances. You could come up with some kind of a actuarial way of understanding what this population, should we further scrutinize this population before we do this. And so AI could just sort of eliminate, in a realistic sense, could really shrink down the government. And the government is this kind of skeletal operation where it says, okay, we're just going to run the country bare bones mostly. We don't need this huge apparatus of pencil pusher people. There's just a lot of pencil pushers in the loop. We can do that, right?
Okay, I think we have to take a step back and first think what society would do in an AI augmented situation. Because I think money, so if you read OpenAI's charter, it's very interesting. They talk about AGI, and then they talk about, we don't know what money will be in a post-AGI world.
Yeah.
I think it's very tongue-in-cheek, really, because they were taking money from investors even as they were writing that. And so I think they will take exception.
I mean, it feels like they were declaring that they don't know how this future is going to look like, but for now we need money.
Yes, yes, which is well, we can talk about that. But
Yeah,
the big point is, I think economics will change. I mean, not foundational. Economics is economics. But what I mean is the way economic systems operate is
yeah.
going to change fundamentally. So,
Mhm.
yes, you do not need as many pencil pushers. But I would say one of the advantages of India, and this is what I really love about India, is in fact, we have so many more people involved in human aspects. So people are taking human subjective judgments at various stages. If we completely automate it, that is an advantage. It will make things far more efficient. But we also need to be much more aware of whether that automation is actually leading to the optimal output.
Sure, sure.
So, because pushing a single button will do a lot more. You're not going to have five other people look over it, create delays, and give you that extra time to actually think maybe that wasn't the best idea. So it is more efficient, but it is like having a Porsche as your capability. If you have a really high accelerating supercar at your disposal and you don't really know how to drive, that is far more dangerous
Yeah. No,
than
I agree. I
you
agree. But I guess
cannot
my
give a
point.
guy who's learned a bicycle a supercar. But
I agree
yes,
with you. I
uh,
agree with you. But I think what I'm also getting at is that we can design these AI systems to sort of align with our best interests, right? Like it takes time. It's going to it take some iterations, but we can absolutely kind of engineer something that absolutely works with these peaks and valleys of our society. So it adapts itself to the point where it understands our weaknesses as a society, it understands our proclivities, it understands kind of like the frauds that happen or the wastes that happen in our society and things like that. So it tightens up the areas that it needs to, and it sort of learns and adapts with us. Ultimately, I guess what my I'm not saying we should just get rid of bureaucracy for the sake of it. It's just freeing up. One is that freeing up of all these individuals to do other things that rather than pencil pushers. Number two is that, well, you're this age-old problem. How do we solve corruption in India, right? Like, so again, I'm talking in very kind of like very idealistic terms. I get it. This is not gonna happen anytime soon. But the point is that when you reduce the chances of like enough pencil pushers wanting their palms greased, you're also kind of addressing the problem right there.
right. So that I would absolutely be for. So let me clarify what I was meaning earlier. When I mean that, what I like about Indian society is that we have a lot more labor involved. So even when we are, for example, somebody is rearing children, they can ask for house help, and you would get a lot more help, and you would not get that kind of help in the United States as easily.
But that's
People are
because
not,
of inequalities. Like,
there are
right?
reasons. Well, in India, what because of the difference in skills, and also because that kind of labor is not really frowned upon, you're going to still have a lot of
I
people
disagree
willing
with
to
that.
work.
I disagree with that. I mean, it
I
is
mean,
very frowned upon. I mean, you look at
I mean, it
movies.
depends on which part of society you're in. But the
If
thing
you
is
look at
that a large
movies,
part of,
Kamvali is the lowest status in India. If you say Kamvali,
well, well, the thing is, it depends, because essentially, if you look at how many Indians are in that bracket, you'd find that a large part of the lower middle class. So you have Kamwali, but you also have carpenters, you have plumbers, and they are also people you would just call, and maybe it depends who is going to respect whom. But the fact of the matter is, you can ask for that kind of help and get it, and a lot of people are trained in it.
because of
And
desperation, they're doing it out of desperation. They're not doing it. These people are not doing it because I guess in all, if you
what
look at
they should not do it out of desperation. They should do it
it is
because
absolutely out
people
of
look at,
desperation. It is out of desperation because you look at
right.
you look at the labor laws enforcement in India, right? It's very, very poor. Like the minimum wage, I don't know what the number is. I can look it up, but most of
300
these
rupees.
maids are made to work in exploitative conditions. It's extremely exploitative in India,
It
and
depends. It depends a lot. Like in Bangalore, um, the amount of money a maid can make is far more than what a maid could make in Bhopal, and definitely far more than one could make in, let's say, Hoshangabad. So,
Yeah, but it's not equivalent to what an American maid would make in terms of
yes,
PPP.
yes. But because of that, it is almost impossible to rear children, because you would be doing not impossible, but it is so prohibitively expensive
It is
to do
expensive
that
in America.
in
I agree with
America,
that.
in
But
Korea, in Japan.
but in
It's
India,
leading to a societal.
in India
Uh,
it's a bug, not a feature. Sorry to interrupt you so many times, but the fact that we have that many maids at our disposal and the middle class can afford it is a bug, not a feature. It's the way we design society, where we have this huge cohort of lower middle class. So I pulled up a Pew Research a couple of years ago. The size of the middle class in India, what they call real middle class, is about 66 million people. It shrunk from 99 to 66, which is an
Right.
extremely tiny proportion. And so there's an even tinier upper class. The lower income class and the poverty class is the bulk. It's a billion people who live, which is basically $2 to $10 a day, which is the cutoff for
Right,
lower
right,
income.
that's
These
true.
are appalling numbers.
But the thing is, if we are looking at, so I'm not saying that Indian society doesn't have to progress outward. That would happen organically as the Indian economy grows. But what I'm trying to say is, it generates employment, because otherwise, for example, right now in the United States, there's a shortage of people who are willing to work as bus operators, or who are at cashiers running. There are severe economic reasons behind all of this, and there are structural reasons which I would argue go as far back as the decision on whether to switch from gold standard to what is today. There is no tying to anything. There are structural reasons behind it. But what is happening in India is, you have 1.4 billion people, and you would need to employ them in some capacity. Not everyone can become a software engineer, because when everyone becomes a software engineer, the software engineer is the equivalent of a maid, effectively. Because it's not as if there is anything. There are historical reasons why certain professions can be frowned upon, in that sense, but it would be called menial for that matter. But when society progresses upwards, the software programmer could be basically the labor class in a future society, because the elite at that stage are doing something else which we cannot even conceive of today. We have a severe, in a post AI world, we have a severe problem of what will human beings do, and that's not a light problem. And what is happening as society moves um, upwards, in the sense that that incomes grow, is we are finding difficulties in even having basic things like marrying and having children. That's getting delayed, and a lot of people are checking out from that, and that has uh, economic ramifications, because if there are less children in the next generation, the next generation pays income tax and builds the social security, pays into that, and does the work in future, which is going to sustain the aging populations of today. So you do need populations to at least remain stable, and definitely not decline. But what we are having is, going to have population declines across the next few decades. So we will need AI to take on a lot of that function, which human beings are doing. So in the future, this kind of excess of maids, let's say, is not sustainable anyway, because the next generations are going to have fewer children. Like, even Indian fertility rate has finally dropped below 2.1, so it's at 2.0 now. So India is not going to have as many maids in the future. That's
Well,
structurally going to disappear. So that's a problem that is going to solve itself. But I do think that the fact that Indian textile workers, for example, they are working in a mill and doing some stuff which has been completely replaced in a factory somewhere else, that is giving some employment to a person who didn't become a graduate. Because if you need graduation for everything, what's going to happen is, you're going to spend all your money on the education system, and that binds everyone to a debt. Whereas in India, you can just go and work without incurring a debt. That kind of freedom is disappearing across the world, including in India. Because in the middle class, you do just have to study this and you have to study there, and then you get a job. It's like, and that's not really economically affordable for everyone, because not everyone can avail credit in the first place.
In India, one of the problems we have with the lower income class and the poverty class is that it's a very self-inflicted injury, right? Like